Now I'm joined in studio by Professor Richard Callan, an independent analyst who was inside the hall a little bit earlier. In fact, he's been here since day one of the national conference. Richard, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your patience while we were listening to Pule Mabe, and sometimes you don't know where he's going with whatever he's saying, but we got the gist of what he had to say. And one of the important things is that there could be another briefing at about 2 o'clock or so by the new Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula. Now, my first question to you, at overriding level, is this the kind of a top seven that will enable Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa to pursue his renewal agenda that he's been harping on? He said this is what we must change the ANC, both inside and outside government, outside the ANC.
Good afternoon, Dan. Thank you. Yes, in theory. So I pause there because the yes depends on whether Ramaphosa is willing to seize this political moment. And unfortunately, over the last 4.5 years, since he became president of the country, he's missed a number of moments where he could have enforced an advantage, could have moved his agenda further forward. For example, after the 2019 national election, which was won mainly because of his support levels across the country. He could have moved then more decisively. He seems to miss those moments. But I think there's been something of a sea change in his character and fortunes and style in the last 3 weeks. Bear in mind, just 19 days ago, he was hours away from resigning. What a turnaround in his career. Here, he's secured re-election and with a top seven that I think is much friendlier to him and to the renewal efforts than the last.
And the gap, it's 579 votes between him and Zweli Mkhize. It's not like a smaller amount of votes. That should give him more confidence.
Well, my benchmark for what a good result would have been for Cyril Ramaphosa coming into this 3 or 4 days ago was 60%. So he's fallen short of that. It's 56.6%, I think, up from 52.1 last time. So he's increased his support, won re-election, and you could say, well, that's a good, he no doubt will say that's a good result, given the travails of his government, given Pala and all the rest of it. But it's not 60%. And I think he'll be conscious of the fact that the House is divided. This ANC is very divided. And to come back to your first question, Dan, if he's to release the handbrake on his leadership and on his government and serve the country in its moment of crisis, he is going to have to give up on this illusion that he can reunite this party and do that at the same time.
It's highly divided, but I saw a bit of confidence in him. You know, there was a point earlier when the sitting top six at the time had to leave the stage, and Kgalema Motlanthe, the head of the elections committee, saying you must leave now before we announce the results of the incoming leadership. And they went and sat amongst the floor of the delegates. I deliberately walked to where they were sitting, and I locked eye to eye with Ramaphosa. This is before the election was announced. And I just gave him a sign. I said, "Are you okay?" And then he responded and he said to me, "I'm okay." Then I knew he'd won.
Yes, I think there have been quite a lot of rumours since about 6 or 7 a.m. this morning. Some of them were accurate. There was a sense that, yes, he'd done enough. That was my intelligence, as it were, that I'd gathered. But some of the other results were so close that, in fact, the information coming out was not always accurate. And I think there was some contestations, there was some recounts. The election for chair, which Gwede Mantashe squeaked home, it was so tight, just tens of votes.
And you could hear the response from the floor, some of the delegates not believing that Mantashe will retain his seat, and that Stan Mathabat from Limpopo, who was seemingly another favorite, did not get it. Now, so if Ramaphosa is going to take this opportunity, as you've said, you said the top seven now looks a little bit more friendlier to him, and I just want us to go down that that list and see who would be somebody there whom he could rely on for making sure that handbrake doesn't come back on in terms of his goals. Paul Mashatile as the deputy.
Well, Mashatile's reputation is as a cunning tactician and a very skillful political operator, and he's also a realist. And I think, however disappointing it may be to him, Mashatile will look at this top seven and read the results and recognise that he will not be able to challenge or defy Ramaphosa because he's in a minority. Nomvula Makonyane is the other person there who is clearly from the other camp. I think that she's close, of course, to Paul Mashatile. You could see the warmth of the hug that they gave each other when she stepped up onto the podium after her victory. And they will be a duo there. But I think Mashatile, being a realist, will be careful not to upset the apple cart. There's a sense that he overplayed his hand in the run-up to this election, this conference, that he was positioning himself as a kingmaker when perhaps he didn't have the right to do so. So I think he's going to tread quite carefully over the next year or two.
Mantashe, you said it was like, whoops, it was a shoe-in, but he's retained the chairmanship. And in the last few weeks, around the Pala panel report from Parliament, he seemingly was the one who was vocally internally and outside the organization supporting Ramaphosa. And you've mentioned that resignation, and apparently Mantashe is that voice that said to me, you're not going anywhere.
Well, you referred to being at the front of the conference hall and in that sort of no man's land between the podium and the delegates. And when you sit there or stand there and you get a sense of the heat of the battle, you realize what a difficult and challenging job being chair of this party is. And Mantashe has the skill and the thick skin and the nous to manage that. And having someone like him on your side that gives, I think, Ramaphosa muscle that he lacks himself, frankly. Mantashe, fighting for his political career, I think, has made a gamble in the last few weeks of backing the president to the hilt, enforcing for the president, made a lot of enemies in the process, but not so many that he lost. He just made it. So I think Mantashe will be sighing a sigh of relief now, but will also think he made a good choice.
Yeah, but Ramaphosa will trust him because, you know, he stood by him.
Well, I think so. And of course, one of the things that Ramaphosa will have to tackle in the new year early on is his cabinet. You know, there are people in his cabinet who have defiantly challenged him. You know, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, obviously, Lindiwe Sisulu. These people will have to be removed from his cabinet at the first available opportunity. And then he has a little dilemma with what to do with Mantashe, because if he's to govern more decisively, he has to move much more swiftly and clearly on energy policy. That's the biggest crisis facing the country. And the just energy transition has to move at a much greater tempo. Mantashe gets in the way of that, frankly. And so if I was the president, or advising the president, I'd say, well, recognize Mantashe as a friend and an ally, but move him into another position in the cabinet.
Okay, Fikile Mbalula, Secretary General. He has wasted no time, Richard. Let me show you on his Twitter page. He's already called his name ANC SG. I mean, it's very short space. He's telling you off the bat, he's telling people, will he bring the energy? I mean, the office has suffered since the suspension of Ace Makashule and then, unfortunately, the death of the deputy SG, Jesse Duarte. And with Mashatile acting, it was not really possible to really have a proper Secretary General's office, which should be like an engine of the organization.
It's a crucial position. It's the managing director position. And Dan, when you and I and others in the media were escorted into the plenary hall earlier, I got a real sense of déjà vu. It felt like 2017 again, because I knew it was tight. I'd had an indication from inside that Ramaphosa had won it again. And then the question was it going to be a Pyrrhic victory? Would he be able to get a better top 6, top 7 out of it? And of course, last time, having narrowly won a great victory in 2017, he then faced the music when Ace Makashule won the Secretary Generalship and immediately deflated that sense of victory. This time, to have the person from his side of the ballot box, Fikile Mbalula, win, I think will encourage him greatly. He will think, thank goodness, I've got a Secretary General who I can trust and rely on, at least for the time being, because Mbalula, he does flip and flop a bit over his long career, so I wouldn't trust him forever, but at least for the time being, he's got a Secretary General who he doesn't have to worry about stabbing the political knife in his back.
Yeah, and do you think that will assist as well Matamela Ramaphosa from a leadership style perspective to really be a little bit bolder in decision making? Well, and as you said earlier, and rather than be hamstrung by the internal party division, say, I've got nothing to lose, I've got this top 7 now, and I'm going for it.
Well, this is the big takeaway question, and it's the reason why, for your viewers, this is still an important matter. However frustrating or irksome the ANC may be to the general public, the reason why it matters what's going on here is because it will have an impact on government. Now, the positive spin on this, the high road scenario, is that having secured victory and with a much more friendly top 6, top 7 now, he will be able to release the handbrake, that the drag factor of his own party will not be so severe, and that he can govern and lead in a much more decisive fashion.
And we have to wait and see who gets into the NEC later.
Of course, we mustn't forget that. It's a very important point, Dan, you make there, that this is the first part of the electoral process. The second part is just as important, because the balance of power in the full NEC, the 80 other additional members, that will be determined tonight with an overnight election, I suspect, announced tomorrow, and we'll have to see whether the balance of power matches the top 7. I think it probably will, in which case, again, a bit of a release of the handbrake. But let's see what the balance of power is tomorrow.
Yeah. Before we go to my colleague Masiko Ratlaka in Hyde Park, and she has another analyst, a professor with her in the studio, just want to ask you this question around the gender issue. This top 7 has got 3 women. Okay. Granted, 2 of them is the Deputy Secretary General, and the women in the ANC have decried the fact that they seem to be relegated to deputizing. But one of the meaningful roles is that of the Treasurer General, and knowing the dire straits of the ANC's purses at the moment, it's gone to a woman, Gwen Ramaphosa. It's the first time in the history of the ANC since 1912 that a woman has been given the purses, literally, so to speak. Were you surprised?
Well, if I can take you back to Friday night, I know it seems, or no, Saturday night, forgive me, seems 2 months ago, not 2 nights ago, but that late night nominations process where Gwen Ramaphosa declined nomination for Deputy Secretary General. And everyone was a bit surprised about that, along with Phoebe Potgieter. She was then nominated from the floor for Treasurer General. It seemed very chaotic, and it seemed as if the Ramaphosa camp was in chaos. But they prevailed. So credit where it's due. They squeaked through, they got what they wanted, and they got someone who is a very safe pair of hands from the renewal side in that position. I didn't think she would make it, frankly, but it shows that this set of delegates actually are very sensible, or at least the majority are, and they wanted a safe pair of hands on the tiller of the finances of this party.
And they gave it to Gwen Ramaphosa. Masiko Ratlaka, good afternoon to you there in Hyde Park. I understand you also have another professor who's going to be analyzing more reaction, of course, Masiko, as we continue the coverage live from Nasrec at the venue of the ANC's 55th National Conference. I know it's not 50-50 in the top 7, Masiko, but it's 3 against 4 men. There are 3 women and 4 men. But one of those roles is a key one, that of Treasurer General. Good afternoon, Masiko.